Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week, although it could be Saturday for some of you. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Cody and Moat of Void. That's a great username. And Wade and Masayu and Umacorn and who else do we have in here? Lots of great people. But yeah, throw your name in the chat. Let me know where you're from. This is going to be an exciting class. A little different than typically, but we're going to have a lot of fun and hopefully some of you pick up on something new. Brett from Hamilton, Ontario, fellow Canadian in the house. Akin, great to see you. Now, we're going to be just doing something interesting today. Let me go ahead and hop over my screen for a second. And a few weeks ago, I posted this on Twitter. Whoop. Love a little animation, right? And this was all created in Adobe XD. Even the Game Boy in the background, but that's a whole other video and whole other live stream. But today we're going to be focusing on creating animated graphics and overlays using XD. Things like the component overlay, that one over that way. That was created in XD, and the little title, which is probably now over my face, that was also created in XD. So we're going to be creating these sorts of things. I'm going to show you how you can export that and then use that in your projects, whether it's Premiere or ScreenFlow or whatever it might be. And I still have a lot to go. I've created a few shortcuts, but there's more that I want to create. Repeat grids and things like that. I think it just helps having these little overlays. What else do I have? I have the boop, of course, but that was not created in XD. But I will get to another boop animation in XD at some point. Alrighty, thank you, Cody, for posting all those links. And of course, I'm getting a phone call from one of my doctors right as I start streaming. It's like they know. I'm convinced that they do know. They'll leave a voicemail or not, I don't know. All right, so we are in Adobe XD. Got a bunch of different presets we can kick things off with, including iPhones and Android devices, pixels, and that sort of thing, web, Instagram stories, custom sizes. Now, even though, we're going to go with the 1920 by 1080 because that's typically what videos are sized at, but because we don't really need it to be the entire screen, so we could do smaller, we could do larger, completely up to you. But let's go ahead and start with a 1920 by 1080 pixel artboard. And here we go. So I'm going to name this overlay, and we're going to probably start just by replicating the title overlay that you saw at the very beginning of this stream. And if anyone has, hey Jack, great to see you. If anyone has questions throughout the stream about XD or design or whatever it might be, definitely throw them in the chat. I am taking a peek from time to time. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to start by building out our final design, what it's going to look like when it's completely expanded, and then we're going to kind of work back. Kerwin says no Windows Phone. I don't know what the dimensions of the Windows Phone is, but I would imagine it's probably similar to one of these, so you can probably get away with it. Or of course you can enter the values. Do people still use Windows phones? And that's not a knock at Windows, but I thought they kind of transitioned. I think they're using Android now, aren't they? Anyways, so we've got our artboard set up, and I'm going to set a darker artboard because usually the intros of my videos where the overlays typically appear on, I go for this darker feel in my office and for my videos. So we're going to start there, and we're going to start building out the component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my shortcut, my rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and drag one out. Now, I'm not too worried about the size. Sometimes I like designing things very large. And it's good because it's a lot easier to scale things down than it is to scale things up, at least when it's rasterized, right? Of course, when it's vector, like it is right now, you can scale it up or down as much as you want. It's not going to really make a difference. But once you actually export this as a video, scaling up will give you some problems. Scaling down, not so bad. All right, so we've got our container, and this is going to be the background where all the information is going to sit. And in the center of this, we might want to include some information. So in this case, this is the title card. So it's going to contain my name and it's going to contain some social media information. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my text tool, shortcut key T, and type out Howard Pinsky. That is me. All right. And I can make sure it's centered possibly. And in terms of the typeface, there are so many. Hey Chris, great to see you. There are so many different typefaces we can use for this. In the one that I'm using on my channel and my streams, I am using our internal typeface, which is Adobe Clean. That is not available externally, but you know, we could go a little bit fancy and do something like, I don't know, New Spirit, and then maybe set that to bold. It's an interesting choice, right? And then I might change that, but for the color, I try to stay away from pure black. I love just introducing a little bit of color and just bumping that up a little bit, especially thinking about what the final design is going to look like. There's going to be a lot of blues because the bounds of an object, you'll notice if I select this object here, we've got blue and we're going to be replicating that. So there's some blues in there. So what I was doing is I was just bringing in some of those blues into this text. And it's very subtle, right? If you step back, it looks dark gray. But there's a little bit of blue in it. It softens it up a touch, and it also just creates a little cohesive design once it's all said and done. Now let's try a few different typefaces. There's Kansas New, which is similar to New Spirit, right? They're very similar. I think I like Kansas out of those two a little bit better. There's also something like Aurea Ultra, which isn't bad, and there's the italic version. I think I may stick with Kansas New, just to go on the fancier side. Obviously, the ones that I'm actually using are a little bit more simple, but you know what? We're gonna have fun with this. All right, now down below, we want to include some social media information. Mayor is asking, what are you making today/tonight? So I am making the overlays. So if I go ahead and launch this one, for example, wrong one. There we go, that one. So that one over there, that's the one for the component shortcut, that's the word. Or this one, this is the one we're starting with, the title shortcut or overlay. So we're creating these little overlays in XD, and then we'll be able to export them afterwards. All right, we've got our name, and then down below, we might want some social media information. So my handle is @Pinsky, and this should be secondary information. So I'm gonna drop the size quite a bit. We may even want to drop the weight a touch as well, semi-bold, possibly medium, and then maybe adjust the color so it's not as strong as the title or my name at the top. And this is kind of where you have to start asking yourself, do you want to stick with this fancier serif typeface? I think for my name, it probably works because that's nice and large. But for the secondary information down at the bottom, we may want to consider moving in a bit of a different direction. If you really like the serif typeface, then you can go for something like Museo, for example, right? It's sort of a serif typeface. There's also Museo Slab, but it's not as intense as something like Kansas New. But let's stick with this because we will be able to change it later on. And then to the left, I want some maybe social media icons. Now there are a few ways to get these sorts of icons into your projects. One way, if I type out the word Twitter, nothing's happening, right? But on my system, I do have, if I can find it, I could probably just type it in, the Font Awesome library installed. And it comes with some text fonts as well. So if I choose, let's say brand, we now have the Twitter logo. And I can also type out Dribble, and now I have that. Now, if you don't have typefaces like this installed on your computer, you can grab an SVG or a PNG. Most of these larger brands, they do provide media kits and brand guidelines, and usually included in those are versions of their logos that are approved to use. Or you can go down to your plugins, and you can go into a plugin like Icons for Design. And if you don't have any plugins installed, hit the plus button at the top right-hand corner, and search for icons for design. You can look at something like Twitter, right? We have basically the same icons, and you can grab those and drag them in. Is there Dribble? There is. So there are a few different versions as well. So you can definitely bring those in. All right, so I'm gonna position this over to the left under my name, position this one about, I don't know, right about here, and then just adjust the spacing a little bit. And if I launch my preview, because I'm working very tight on this document, if I launch my preview to take a look at what it looks like, that could potentially work. I do think that the social media information at the bottom is a little bit smaller. So someone's asking, can you please shout out my name? My name is Arslan. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Great to see you, Arslan or Arslan. I'm not sure, but great to see you. All right, so I'm gonna just bump this up a little bit. That's a bit better. I think that could work. Now the social media icons are definitely a little bit larger, right? So I might want to just shrink these down a touch. I can also drag out some guides from the top. I'm just gonna line it up with my name here. Let's see what that looks like. Also, the @ is a little bit large as well. Oops. Nah. Let's actually go ahead and put this on a separate layer. That way I have a little bit more control over how this looks. I like things lined up. I don't know about all of you, but I like lining things up, and sometimes I get very particular about my spacing and my alignment. That looks pretty good about there, and these are almost aligned. Yeah, it's close enough. The Twitter logo is a little bit smaller, but that is okay. That'll do, pig. That'll do. All right, that could work. All right, hey Gal, great to see you. Hey Stacy. Thanks Cody for posting the link to Font Awesome. It's a wonderful library. And if you do also have icons, you know, from Font Awesome or any of those other resources, then they usually also include SVGs, PNGs, and that sort of thing. And Font Awesome just has a massive library of different weights and brands and duotones, which is kind of fun, right? Just great stuff. I love icons. But if you don't have any icon sets, Icons for Design is a great resource. It pulls in open source icons so you can use them in your projects. And whoops, wrong one, wrong document. All right, so I think that'll do. Yeah, possibly. Okay, so we're gonna make sure that all of this is nice. Whoops. All right. Very good. I'm gonna group this. I'm gonna call this text. And I'm pretty happy with that. Now, one thing that we're gonna want to do is thinking through a little bit, because you definitely have to think these things through a touch, is, we may want to get to the point where we might want several overlays. And knowing that we're gonna have multiple artboards on this project, we really don't wanna go through every single artboard and redo the entire thing. So, if my name changes, I don't know why that would happen, but if maybe my social media handle changes, or if I want to add an additional icon, or when we get to the point where we're going to be adding shortcuts, we might want to change the text. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a component from this. And knowing that we don't want this to be seen initially, we might want to utilize a mask. Now, we already have the perfect container in place to use as a mask. We have this, rounded rectangle in the background. So I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate that. I'm gonna move it on top of my text layers. I'm gonna name this mask in the layers panel, but it doesn't have to be called mask. It could be called banana sandwich for all I care. It just has to be on top of all the layers that will be masked inside of it. So I'm gonna select the mask and also the group containing the text. Whoops, wrong shortcut. Hold down Shift, and then Object Mask with Shape, or Command and Control Shift and M. Boop, right? And it looks just like it did before, right? But it's now masked. So if anything goes outside of this mask, you're not going to be able to see it. Or if you grab the actual mask bounds and you shrink it down, right, we'll be able to hide that text. Now we'll get to that, that little bit in a second. Yeah, banana sandwich, there you go. But the banana sandwich layer, I'm gonna make an overlay with a banana sandwich. Don't know why, but we're gonna do it at some point. All right, now, again, going back to what I was talking about, we wanna make sure that this is fully editable. So we have this mask, this object mask selected with our text, and now we wanna turn this into a component. So we're gonna press that plus button over to the right. You can also do that inside of your document assets right over here. There we go. And you can also use the Command and Control K shortcut, and there is it that way? Yeah, there's that little overlay over there. If we have time, we'll get to that one as well. All right, so that's looking okay. Not great, but it's looking okay. Now, on top of this, we want to start creating the elements that will really make this feel like it's an Adobe XD or design-related overlay. And again, going back to the example earlier, when you have an object selected that's not a component, you have these blue bounds that go around the side. And also you have these little handles, right? White with a blue border. So we're gonna simulate that. So with this container in the background selected, what I might want to do is duplicate this so we can just use the border. Now, of course, you can go ahead and turn a border on this shape, but sometimes I like working in separate layers just to keep things organized, and it just gives me complete control over how things are gonna look. So I'm going to duplicate this shape. Let's go ahead and move it on top. We don't want a fill in this particular example, so I'm gonna turn that fill off, just like that, and we're gonna turn a border on. Now, we might be able to squeeze in here and sample that border color there. It's probably also the same color as this one here, so you can just sample any blue that's on the document, or you can open up the color picker and sample your own. And then we're really gonna bump this up. Because even though, is 14 too much? I don't know, it's not bad, maybe 12. So even though the actual bounds of an object are very thin, if we were to really make it that thin, which is probably like 1 pixel, it's really not going to get the point across, especially when there's an animated overlay. So we're going to really emphasize and, just bump up the values of some of these elements. So now that we have that border in place on all the corners and also the middle points, we want those circles. Again, they're white circles with blue borders. So we're going to grab the ellipse tool, shortcut key E, draw one out. Again, we're going to make them a little bit larger than they typically would be. And we're gonna keep the fill at white, but we're gonna sample this blue. And by the way, what I should probably do as I'm building this out is I should start saving some of these colors and these character styles. So if I hop over to my document assets, I have this object selected. I'm gonna press the plus button. It's gonna save not just the fill color, it's also gonna save the border color. And I'm gonna dive in here, add this as a character style, and this one as well. All right. So we have one created, and now we may want a few more. So again, if we take a look, right, we have one in the middle, on top and bottom, on these sides, and then on the edges as well. So we're gonna duplicate this downwards. We'll duplicate one on the right, and if I move it to the perfect spot, it's gonna let me know that it's perfectly centered. And one over here. And then we also have on this side. Now, here's a big question that you have to start asking yourself. So if I do have a rounded rectangle, right, in Adobe XD, and I round out the corners completely, the bounds of this rectangle, the blue bounds that we're recreating, extend off, right? So they don't follow the curve of the shape. And I really wouldn't expect it to. I would want it to, be square and rectangular like that. If we were to do that in this object here, it would just look strange, wouldn't it? It would look a little bit weird. So in this case, we have to kind of make our own rules a little bit. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to move these to almost the corners where, I'm going to delete this one, almost, where that curve starts to happen. And I can do the same thing on this side as well. And if I hold down my Alt or Option key, I can see that this is about 78 pixels from the one on the left. And I can do the same over here, 75, let's go for 78. Doesn't have to be 75 or 78, but we're gonna run with that. And now we have our bounds. And it's looking a little bit better. You know, again, if we're going to try to replicate it exactly, it would be something like this. And then these would be kind of on the corner here. And these would be here. But it would just look strange with that rounded rectangle in the background. If we were dealing with a non-rounded rectangle, it would look fine, right? But yeah, the rounded rectangle, it throws it off. So we're gonna stick with something like this. I think it could work. All right, now I'm also gonna make sure that I group. This will be called bounds. And I'm gonna group all these elements, Command and Control G, and bounds. There we go. So we have our objects looking pretty good and probably ready to go. We have our bounds set. We have our background container, which is that white shape in the background. We have our text, which is masked, and all of that is inside of a component. Now, the last thing we may want is a pointer. One more time, if I show that title at the bottom, right over top of my face, there's a pointer that comes in that grabs one of those points and pulls it outwards to enlarge it, and then it pulls it back in. So we want to create something to that effect as well. Now, I do, in one of my libraries, I do have a pointer that I can use, which is right over here. So I can just drag that out and, call it a day. There's a few other things you can do. Going back to our discussion about icons, if you search for something like pointer, there are definitely some here. I don't know if cursor will come up with anything. No. And then mouse, probably not as well. Maybe, I guess so. So pointer or mouse will definitely work. And Tim is saying a serif font in the world of UI and UX. There are a lot of companies that are experimenting and really using serif typefaces for their branding these days. If it's done correctly, it's a nice, it works, but it has to be done correctly. And there's a time and a place for serif typefaces. I can't think of an example, but you probably don't want to use it in all cases. So now if we want to recreate something like this, so if you don't have this at your disposal, what you could do is you can grab something like the polygon tool, shortcut key Y, drag out a polygon like this. I might want to round out the corners a little bit by dragging on this handle. You also have this other handle on the right-hand side. This is for your star value. We're not going to want to drag this out, although the bottom, kind of, possibly, maybe, right? But the sides, we really don't want that. So we're going to leave it at this. I don't think 4 will really do, whoops, undo. I don't think 4 sides with star will really do much for us, no. So we're going to leave it at this. And what we want to do is, simulate this little notch or whatever you want to call this edge here. So now that I have this created, I'm also going to sample this color. Let's apply a border on the inside or outside probably. I mentioned this during my stream yesterday on my YouTube channel, is when you're working with borders, the position of the border, whether it's on the inside, outside, or center, will affect how the rounded corners look. So you'll notice right now it's on the inside of this shape. And the rounded corner on the outside is pretty pronounced, and on the inside, it's not, right? Now, if you were to put it on the outside, it's more even, and in the center, it's kind of in between. All right, Tim says, still waiting for the star wipe transition in XD. Star wipe, what? I know what a star wipe transition is. I'm trying to picture it, what that looks like. Hey, John from the Netherlands, great to see you. Did you create the animation in After Effects or XD for your YouTube? Mayor, which animation are you referring to? The ones that we're creating today, like the overlays, that was created in XD. But let me know which animation exactly we're referring to. All right, so we've got that, and I'm going to go ahead and convert this into a path just by pressing Return or Command and Control 8. And I'm going to set a point right in the middle, and then pull this up. I can also just use my arrow keys a little bit, just so it's more accurate. There we go. Now, what you're probably going to notice is we have a little bit of a weird sharp edge here. We can very easily deal with that by resetting this and just pulling this in a little bit. Something like that. Almost, almost. I think probably putting the border on the outside would have probably worked better, but I think that works. You just gotta finesse this into place a little bit. Something like, oh, right about there. That's pretty close. That'll do, I think. Something like that. It's going to be so small that you're probably not even going to notice a difference, right? Now, this one over here is, you know, it's definitely a little bit different, so I'm going to bump up the size a touch. I might want to pull this in a little bit, right? It just gives you an idea of how you can create something like that pointer on the left. Now, because this one looks a lot better than the one I just created, we're going to run with this one. All right, the one that you actually use, the one you're trying to recreate, was it originally created in XD or After Effects? No, so these titles were all created in Adobe XD, and if we do get to the end, I'm going to show you how you can wire them all up and then export them or record them and then use them in something like Premiere or ScreenFlow or After Effects. Yeah, we'll get to that, hopefully. Okay. I think that could work. Oops. All right, so at this point, we have all of our elements, I believe, in place. And now we can really start thinking about how this animation is going to look when it's in action, right? So I'm going to make sure that this is centered. Right about there. And again, like I mentioned, we might want to work backwards. Sometimes when you're working on animations that have an end state, working backwards might help, because you'll see once we get to the beginning state, it's going to look a little bit strange, right? And it would be very difficult to go from that state all the way to the end state and have it look normal. Hey, Zane from Pakistan, great to see you. He says your tutorial is next level. I appreciate that. I'm glad you're learning stuff. All right. Yeah, Aubrey's saying these details like tweaking the corners are always so helpful. Yeah, sometimes I get a little bit too carried away with tweaking things like corners and stuff like that. An hour goes by and all of a sudden I'm still tweaking corners. All right, so we have our end, or sort of our end state, right? And now we want to go backwards to kind of show how this is going to not only reveal itself, but how it's going to hide itself after the animation is complete. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this over to the left. Usually I duplicate to the right, but that's going to be the hiding right at the end of it. And then to the left is the beginning. So at this point, if you remember the animation at the beginning, it kind of like expands and then, right? It'll make more sense. Sound effects may not help right now. So what we're going to do is we don't want the text to be seen here. So we're going to dive in here and we're going to dive into our component. We're going to select the mask layer, the actual mask layer right there. Whoops. And we're going to bring this inwards. Right? And I'm going to move it down just a touch so that we don't see that little Y right there, right? Just like that. So if I click away, we have no text because it's all hidden inside of that particular mask. Now, the next thing we might want to do is we may want to adjust both of these objects. So we may want to make the container a little bit smaller, just so that we have something to expand. All right, so I'm going to grab the container. I'm going to shrink it down, and I'm holding down my Alt-Option key and dragging down a little bit. And dragging like this a little bit as well. All right. And then on the inside of this, we may also want to bring our bounds in as well. So I'm going to drag this all the way in. So it's basically a nice line, and then do the same thing over here. Just like that. And then I might want all of these to collapse on each other, maybe one on each side. So I'm going to dive in, grab this. Maybe I'll actually grab this one. Oops, grab these two and just move them on over like that. So they're all hiding behind each other. Let's actually bring this in a little bit more. And then my pointer down here, I want that to control the action. Hey, Dreedy, great to see you. So I'm going to move the pointer right over here on this point there. All right. And that's it. And that's the beauty of auto animate, is you don't have to worry about keyframing like you do in After Effects or other applications. You just have to design. So we had our end state, we duplicated the artboard over here, and then we just created what that animation is going to look like before it gets to this end state, right? And just to give you an idea of what the animation may look like, if I go ahead and go into prototype mode right here at the top, all of this is going to kick off on time triggers. So we don't have to, click on anything. We don't have to use any keyboard shortcuts. We just have to sit back and watch. So I'm going to select the overall artboard, which I should probably name something other than overlay-1, but we'll get to that. And I'm going to drag this handle over to this second artboard. And then from the properties inspector, we want to make sure that we have time as the trigger for these artboards. We're going to set a delay. We'll do 0.6 seconds right now. Likely when we actually wire all of them up, certain ones will have a delay of 0 seconds because we want it to kick off immediately. But just so we can see it in action, we'll do 0.6. And Mayor is asking, what's the FPS of the video output? So are you referring to the stream that you're watching now? That should be 60 frames per second, unless you change it to something else. But if you're also referring to what the animation is, if you're previewing on the desktop, I believe that's 60 frames per second as well, but I could be wrong. But of course, a lot of that depends on how much animation is happening, how big the file size is. There's a lot that goes into it, but I believe it tries to get to about 60. All right, and then down here, we want to go to auto animate for the type. And then we're going to go for, there's a lot of different ways we can do this. Let's keep it simple right now. Ease in and out with a duration of around 0.4 seconds. It might be a bit fast, but let's go ahead and launch the preview. Not bad, right? And let me just check for a very quick second. Okay, so on the actual one, I have snap. So snap, and then I think I had 0.6. So it adds like a little bit of a, did you see that? It adds a little bit of a snap right at the end. Look closely. Whoop. Fancy, right? And again, all auto animate. So we didn't have to do any weird keyframing. It just does its thing. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is over to the left of this, before it gets to this point here. Drady is asking, can we export XD animation to a Lottie? So we cannot. That would be a good suggestion, though. Definitely head over to adobeXD.uservoice.com. Lottie's big these days, and one day, hopefully, we'll get some support for Lottie, but definitely go over there and upvote that request. All right, so over here, what we want to do is not only collapse this even more, we also want to move it. We want to move it over to the side because we want, some motion. Mayor is asking, what exactly is snap? So what snap is, you can imagine, I wish I had an example of like a physical object, but so bounce, let's look at bounce for a second, right? I hate bounce, but let's look at bounce for a second. When you play bounce, it goes boing, right? There's a pretty large fluctuation at the end. One more time, boing, right? Snap is like the calm version of bounce. So if I switch back to snap, actually, if I switch over to, let's say, 5 seconds, you can kind of see right at the end there, it gradually grows and then it shrinks down, but very subtly. So it's a nice effect. And it works in some cases it may not work, but it just adds a little bit of a view at the end. All right, so here again, we want to collapse it even further and then move it over to the left so that this pointer can actually drag it on over, right? So we're gonna grab the bounds that we have selected now. We're gonna drag this in, make sure everything lines up nicely. We're also gonna do the same thing for this. Now we wanna make this essentially into a circle. So right now we have the width at 397 and the height at 166. So we essentially want to match that. And you can enter the values directly in the properties inspector as well, right? And then I'm going to shrink it down a touch. So we just have this little tiny shape, and then I'm going to move the pointer over here, and we want to move all of this. Now, we also have that shortcut probably don't have to, or not the shortcut, the actual text, which is masked, we probably don't have to move that because it's essentially invisible right now. So I'm going to select all of this. We don't have to worry about the shortcut, so I deselected that. And we're going to switch it on over to the left over here. Now, one more thing I might want to do is, because I really want to simulate motion, right? I might want to just take this pointer and rotate it a little bit, so that as it's dragging this object over to the right, it's kind of swiveling, so it gives that momentum, right? And speaking of momentum, Drew in the chat says momentum continues beyond constraints and then snaps back, but doesn't repeat. See, that's an elegant answer, other than me saying "vroom," right? Thank you, Drew. I appreciate that, and great to see you, Drew. All right, so we'll do something like that. Maybe we'll even bring this down even more, and we'll see what that looks like as well. And you know what looks like it doesn't line up perfectly, that's fine. It's going to happen so quickly, you're not even going to see it. Experimentation is big for these types of things, and I can't tell you how many revisions I went through to get to this point. Hey, Fergie, great to see you. So, you know, definitely experiment. You're going to create a very basic example first, and then you're going to start thinking, how can I add some additional motion to this? And how can I make it look exciting? And, you know, it just explodes from there. So again, we're going to go into prototype mode. We're going to swivel this over to the second artboard. We're going to keep the time trigger at 0.6 seconds for now. But what you might want to do is set the properties to something like ease in. Hey, Megan, great to see you. And then maybe we'll do 0.4 seconds. And on this second artboard, we still have the time trigger set to 0.6. We're going to bump it down to 0. Now, what's cool about ease in, and we're going to talk a lot about this in a second, is usually we would use ease in and out. So there's a little bit of a, Drew could probably explain this a lot better than I can. There's a little bit of a ramp at the beginning and a little bit of a ramp at the end. So it's a bit slower, and then it goes, and then it's a little bit slower as it kind of settles in, right? But actually, let's go for ease in and out first, just so I can show you. You're going to notice when this little guy here gets to this middle section, it's going to slow down, and it's going to just look a bit strange, right? Right? Did you see that? Did you see that stop? Right? It stopped before that next animation kicked off. And that's the ease out in action. So if we switch this over to just ease in, we should have a more fluid motion. Did you see that? You see the difference? It's so difficult to see, but you can probably see the difference. Immediately, once it hits that next artboard, it expands. You really have to see it to understand it. See it a few times to really understand it. All right, so that one looks pretty good. And now to get to this point, we have to start thinking, how do we actually want this shape to come into play, right? Do we just want it to appear there? Could be interesting. Or do we want it to fly into the frame from out of the frame, right? And then do its thing. So let's duplicate this over, and I'm gonna go back into design mode. So what I think might be kind of cool, and because we're using a rounded rectangle, we can very easily stretch something like this out, right? So I'm gonna stretch this out like this. I'm gonna move this up. And we may even want the pointer to kind of be hidden down at the bottom. And I'm gonna kind of leave it poking out here. There are ways you can move it outside of the artboard and not have it escape to the pasteboard, like it, actually it's not doing it now, which is, it usually does, but hey, I'll take it, right? But I'll have it pointed out there. And the nice thing is we can always crop that out when we're actually applying this in real life, right? So we're gonna have that there, and I rotated the pointer. And then on this one more artboard over here to this side, we're gonna want this to kind of fly in, but we may also want to add a little bit more motion. Let me just check for questions, right? Okay. So we're gonna dive in and we're gonna grab these elements here, and maybe we'll start it off in more of a collapse state, and then just move this down. Now, you're gonna notice now, right? It moved onto the pasteboard. And that's because I deliberately dragged this down here. So it naturally assumes that I wanted to put it on the pasteboard. Now there are a few ways we can actually, move this down there without having to have it go into the pasteboard. Now, of course, one thing we can do is just have a little bit of it peeking out like this. And again, we can crop that. But what we can also do is in prototype mode, we can wire this artboard up here. We'll worry about the properties in a second. And then if we grab these two elements and move them down, they're not going to escape the pasteboard. Because going into prototype mode and wiring up this artboard to the next artboard and then moving it down deliberately tells XD that you want it to stay on here, especially when you're in prototype mode, right? Or you can put it into a larger group with other elements that are on the artboard, like the component that we created earlier. So a lot of different ways to do it, right? Now, in terms of the way we're gonna get this over here, a lot of different transitions we can potentially use. So, again, we're gonna keep that little bit of a delay at the beginning. We're gonna stick with ease in, and maybe we'll do 0.6 seconds. When it flies up, we may want it to be a little bit slower, and then it'll kind of speed up a touch, right? Now on this second artboard, going to the third, this one here, we don't want that delay because we want it to kick off immediately. So we're gonna drop that delay to 0 seconds, just like that. And then we're gonna set it to something like ease out. So this will give us the best of both worlds, right? We're going to have an ease in on the first artboard. It's gonna immediately transition to the second, and it's gonna ease out. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, if we were to have ease in and out on the first artboard, there would be a weird delay, and I'll show you that in a second. And we'll do, let's say, 0.4. More spam phone calls. All right, Jeffrey says, I owe my new design. I can't read today. I'm sorry. He says, hey Howard, I owe my new UI design position to you. No, you don't. You owe it to yourself, Jeffrey. I know a lot of people, we get messages all the time from people who have been watching our streams, taking part in our daily challenges, saying, I owe it all to you guys. I learned so much. No, you forced yourself and you committed to learning and bettering your skills. So we just sat here and we taught something. You soaked all that information in and you became the designer that you did, Jeffrey, and everyone else who might be in your position. So Jeffrey, congratulations. Everyone, yeah, just like Fergie, everyone in the chat, put little clapping emojis. I love hearing stories like this. I love hearing, especially in the world that we're living in today, it's rough out there. But congratulations. That's wonderful to hear, Jeffrey. All right, so, and just before we show the actual the good animation, right? We're gonna switch it over to ease in and out. And on this one, ease in, out as well, right? And you're gonna see how it looks a little bit awkward. Right? You saw that, right? Watch it one more time. It kind of does this weird pause thing. And that's because it's doing exactly what we told it to do, right? It's easing in, which is nice, but it's also easing out. So there's a little bit of a slow delay at the end, right? So we're gonna switch this one to ease in and the second artboard to ease out, just like that. And now, let me just make sure I don't have another delay. So I do have a time on this one, 0 seconds, and this one, perfect, okay. Let's watch that one more time and we'll see the difference. That is a massive difference. One little change, just changing from ease in and out to ease in and then ease out. It just creates this nice fluid motion. I can just watch this all day. And we've got this pointer coming in at a different angle, dragging things over. And now what we want to do is, wrap this up and show what it's gonna look like when it actually collapses. So we've got this state over here. I'm gonna duplicate this artboard down here so we have another line. And we essentially wanna go backwards, but possibly a little bit of a different feel to this, right? So we may wanna start by collapsing, just like we did earlier. So I'm gonna grab that container, drag this down. We're gonna make it a little bit thinner than before. And of course you could probably also grab this artboard just to make your life a little bit easier. But in case some of you missed it, let's go through some of it again. Like that. We're going to grab the mask inside of this object. Whoops. Bring that down. I can also grab the actual text and move that up as well, just to give a little bit of motion there. Might be a little bit overkill, but we can do that, right? And then for the actual bounds, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to drag this down, and you're noticing it's not as stubby as the other one, right? Because we're going for a little bit, we want to mix it up a little bit. So we're going to do something like this. We're going to grab our pointer. We might want to rotate it a little bit. Put that one there, right? And we can possibly even squeeze it in a little bit, but we'll see how things look. And then on the next one, we essentially want it to, collapse to a nothing state. So we're going to move all of this over, right? So we're going to grab the container, shift that over here, grab our bounds. And I just love how responsive resize is just allowing everything to really shift over really nicely. Like, things aren't squishing or anything like that. It's just all working as you would expect. I'm going to shift the pointer over. And just like before, we're going to rotate it a bit. And this is kind of where I want everything to squeeze down into nothing. So we're going to grab all of this. We don't need to grab that text layer because that's basically hidden anyway. I'm going to make sure that this is perfectly circular. It'll just make things a little bit easier to move. And then shrink it on down just like that. And now we basically can't see it, which is nice, right? All right, and then finally, we may just want to move all this stuff off. So we want one more artboard. And I was talking earlier about, not having to worry about keyframing and things like that. In a sense, this is keyframing. It's just not worrying about timelines and, curves and easing options. Even though we have easing options, you don't have to worry about really customizing things. It's all visual, which is really nice. So here I might want to rotate this a touch, and we're going to drag the arrow over here, right? All right, so now we can wire all of these up. So, whoop, I lost my chat. Where'd my chat go? There we go. Okay, so from this artboard here, which actually displays the name, we want it to have a little bit of a delay because we don't want it to show and then just kind of disappear. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag the handle over to this artboard that we created where the collapse state is starting to happen. We'll give it a delay of about 2 seconds because I want that to remain on screen for a little bit. And then very similar to our discussion earlier about the easing options, ease in is going to work great because it'll allow that ramp up and then it'll allow a transition immediately to the next artboard. And then, Alex, I'll get to your question in just a moment. And then I'll drag this handle over to the second artboard. And what we're going to do here is we're going to, maybe we'll do no animation. And you'll see why in a second, hopefully. And we're going to have no delay, no easing. That's what I meant. And then on this one, here to here, this is where we may want to get a little bit fancy and do something like wind up, possibly, right? With also a 0-second delay. So, if all went well, let's go ahead and preview from the beginning. Right, there's the 2-second delay, collapse, and view. Not bad. There are some weird things. When this pointer went down, we can kind of see the little dot kind of flying away. I don't know where that went. Probably when I rotated it, moved it a little bit. Although it's still there, so it should. I'll have to look at that. But for the most part, it did a pretty good job, right? One more time. 2 seconds, and then it collapses. Now, what I noticed is I had the wrong... So on this artboard here, this is why you have to really look at things, right? On this artboard here, I had this point selected at the bottom, which I should probably actually switch it over to this point here. Would probably make more sense, right? Because you're expanding it outwards, you probably wouldn't grab this point. Although it doesn't matter. I'm overthinking things. Let's try that one more time, see if that looks a little bit more natural. There we go. Okay, that looks a bit better. And what we can do, we can also select this information here. Maybe I'll collapse it just a little bit, right? Something like that. And one more time. So this here, when it goes from this state, this to this, it feels a little bit slow. So I'm gonna speed this up a touch to about 0.2 seconds. That feels a bit better, I think. And then the wind up adds a fun little effect where it kind of goes forward a little bit and then it kind of goes back. All right, let me talk to Alex's question before I show you how you would export something like this. So Alex is saying, do you ever experience burnout? What tips do you have for when that happens? So I experience burnout all the time. I love what I do. I love designing. I love creating new things. I love teaching. But humans are humans, right? We experience burnout. Doesn't matter how much you love something, you're just going to experience burnout. It's bound to happen. And I think for me, what has definitely helped over the years is not just walking away. And thankfully, I work for a company who promotes mental health and promotes taking breaks, promotes taking days off. It's wonderful. But you know, if I'm sitting at a computer and I've been designing for hours and hours and hours, it's not healthy. That's number one. And number two, as you're designing for hours upon hours, your brain becomes accustomed to whatever it is you're looking at. So even if it's the worst thing in the world, your brain's going to say, okay, well, I've been working on this for this amount of time. It's great. It looks perfect, right? Nothing could be better than this. Then you walk away for 15 minutes to get a glass of water or go for a walk outside. You come back or you go to sleep and you come back and you're like, this is terrible. This is the worst thing ever, because your brain was accustomed to it. So, you know, for short-term burnouts, go for walks, just grab a glass of water. If you have a standing desk, that helps a little bit just to keep yourself a little bit in motion. But longer term, it's difficult because it really depends on your situation. If you are working on very tight deadlines for big clients and you have a massive workload, there's only so much you can do to take time off, right? You have to finish your work. And there may be opportunities to, you know, maybe put some of the work off, or maybe don't take so much work on. Or, you know, one thing that helps me a lot is just pivoting to something that I enjoy in my personal life. So if I still have to design something, I'll pick something like, I play Pokemon Go a lot. I'll pick something like that and I'll design an experience for that. So I'm still designing, I'm still kind of doing work, but I'm doing something that I like outside of my work, and it helps a little bit. But if anyone else in the chat has suggestions, again, a lot of it depends on what you're able to accomplish or what you're able to do, you know, on your day-to-day workflows. It's tricky sometimes because we overwork ourselves. I don't know where you're from, Alex, but I know in America, we overwork ourselves. Even at companies like Adobe, who tells us all the time, don't overwork yourself, take days off, take breaks and that sort of thing. We still do. We still cram as much in as possible. Try not to if you can. I know it's easier said than done. All right, so things are looking pretty good, right? And I'm pretty happy with the animation aside from that one little blip, which maybe I wonder if this would help if I just kind of move this down a touch. Possibly, I don't know. You can still kind of see it. It's hard to see, but oh, because probably the wind up is messing it up a little bit. Anyways, doesn't matter. So Cody's mentioned the Animal Crossing companion app. Things like that I do for fun. And then eventually it turns into things like master classes and videos and stuff. I have a great job. I love my job. So, you know, thinking about exporting, right? XD obviously allows you to record videos up at the top, but it does not, you know, if I turned off the artboard, it doesn't export as a transparent video. That requires different codecs and all that fun stuff. So the solution is actually to use a green screen, right? You can chroma key it. So if I switch this over to green, this is gonna be very blaring and jarring, right? Something like that. And then I were to, you know, use that same recording function, or if I have, you know, QuickTime on the Mac or ScreenFlow or whatever it might be, I can record it various other ways, right? And then I don't think I have Premiere open, But once you have that recorded, you can take it into Premiere, After Effects, ScreenFlow, whatever it might be. And it's a very simple chroma key because there's really nothing here that's green, and the background is a perfect green. So you just press the chroma key button. In Premiere, it's Ultra key, and you just sample that green, and that's it. You're all good to go, and it looks wonderful. And maybe I'll get more in depth with that at some point. Please do not green. Well, green is perfect for chroma keying, but I know it's a very bright color, so I apologize. Let me undo that. But if you're chroma keying, green is probably the way to go. Blue would not work in this situation because the bounds are blue, and it would just cause all sorts of problems. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for me for today. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes. I will be back next week with another XD Masterclass. We're going to look at more web design next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Stick around, and I will see you all next time.